Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, not to be confused with another novel called Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, which was written over 50 years after this book. That is also a great book, but it's a completely different book, though. Now, H.G. Wells is also the author of books like The Time Machine and The War of the Worlds. Now, The Invisible Man was published in 1897. Now, this was actually originally published in serialized form, and it was published in a magazine, but that same year it was published as a novel. And it's funny that this was published in 1897, which is the same year that Bram Stoker's Dracula was published. That's two novels that ended up introducing very iconic characters, which were both published in the same year, although I do think Dracula ended up being a little more famous than The Invisible Man. Now, the plot of The Invisible Man is it begins where this stranger comes to this small town in England, and he comes to this inn, and this stranger, his face is wrapped up in bandages, and people assume that he was in some kind of horrible accident, but he just wants to be left alone in his room, and people start noticing how he's kind of a dick to everybody there, and it turns out there are these robberies that start happening in the town, and people start pointing their fingers to him, and it's soon revealed that underneath his clothes and his bandages, he's invisible, and when they try to apprehend him, he sheds his clothes and his bandages and escapes, and now this invisible man is terrorizing the countryside. And it's soon revealed in the story that this invisible man was a former medical student named Griffin who discovered a chemical that can actually make tissue invisible, and after testing this out on a cat, he tested it on himself and turned invisible, but he soon discovered that while being invisible has its advantages, it also has many disadvantages, and he also can't reverse the process, so he's stuck as an invisible man. Now, The Invisible Man is very much a story about science gone wrong, but it's also kind of a story about how the pursuit of greed only leads to despair. Like, in the story, you realize that all Griffin ever cared about was money and fame, and that's what he was pursuing. He wasn't pursuing science for the betterment of mankind, he was pursuing it for his own personal greed, and by the end of the story, he's invisible, and he's also just a miserable human being by the end of the story, and he's outcast from society. So, in a lot of ways, this book is kind of a commentary on how greed really only leads to despair. And The Invisible Man is also a really funny book, too. Like, I actually very much view this book as kind of a dark comedy, because there's actually a lot of humor in this book, like, especially like when you see the other characters' reactions to an invisible man. Like, some of their reactions to this are actually downright hilarious. Like, in the book, there's a certain point where the Invisible Man tries to acquire the help of a homeless man named Thomas Marvel, and when they first meet each other, some of the dialogue between these two characters is actually genuinely funny. Now, what's interesting about the character of Griffin is, even though he's the villain of the story, he's also the main character of the story. Like, this is one one of those cases where the antagonist is also the protagonist, so I very much do consider the Invisible Man to very much be an anti-hero in the story. But yeah, I would definitely recommend The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. This was a really enjoyable book, and a very entertaining book, and also a very darkly funny book as well. So I would definitely recommend this. Now, in 1933, Universal made an adaptation of this book, which was actually directed by James Whale, who also directed the 1931 version of Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein. Now, the 1933 film starred Claude Rains as the Invisible Man, and it's a very iconic performance, and I really do think it was that movie that really made the Invisible Man into such an iconic character. Now, the 1933 film, The Invisible Man, actually had a couple of sequels made to it. In 1940, there was The Invisible Man Returns, which starred Vincent Price, and then that same year, there was a film called The Invisible Woman, and then there was The Invisible Agent, and The Invisible Man's Revenge, and then in 1951, there was Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man. Now, the character of the Invisible Man made a very brief appearance at the end of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Also, when I was a little kid, I used to watch this animated movie called Mad, Mad, Mad Monsters, which was kind of a parody on all the Universal monster movies, and the Invisible Man was in that movie, and in that movie he actually had a family. There were also many different television series made based on this book. Like, I know there was an animated series at one point, and in 2000, Sci-Fi Channel had a TV series called The Invisible Man, which was loosely based on this story. Alan Moore also made The Invisible Man one of the characters in his comic book series, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Also, the 2000 film Hollow Man with Kevin Bacon may have been loosely inspired by this book as well. So, the character of the Invisible Man has definitely gone on to become a very iconic character. So yeah, that's my review on The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, and bye.